Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. The lighting is really bad. Let's see here. Sorry. I apologize. It is really bad. It's super bright. I'm trying to look at myself in the camera. I look like the sun is straight dead in my face. That is so funny. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave it like that because that means that I would have to turn off one of my big lights. I'm in a different room today. But anyways, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I want to just kind of have a conversation again. Welcome to those of you who view this wherever you are, wherever you will be. Again, I apologize for the bright light, but don't know where it came from. I just kind of have an idea, but nonetheless, I just want to share a thought with you all. And yes, I have a coffee mug, and it's called Mama Bear. My daughter, there you go. My daughter and her family went to Alaska, and I love mugs. And this one is perfect for hot chocolate. Of course, I have coffee in it and all, as I do most of the time. And also, anyways, as you can see on the thumbnail, the topic on just want to share a conversation. When we hear the verse or the words, just show up with and be your best version. That's kind of the way I hear it expressed. It's not something that I myself use. There's certain phrases that are common and all, and that's one of the phrases that you just won't probably ever hear me use it. But nonetheless, I hear it used a lot, where they say just show up and be the best version of you. And the other day I was thinking about that because I heard it in a conversation, and the conversation was around women going on dates, meeting new friends, going to events. It was suggested just bring the best version of you. And I thought about that, as I often do, and I think, well, how do I know who that is if I haven't, or have I met my best version? Because it suggests that if I'm not my best, then there means that there's a part of me that is not my best. And that's the one that I want to keep hidden or stay at home. So I would say, if you're not in the mood, and that's probably, I don't know if that's what's technically meant, if you don't have the right attitude, then don't show up or don't go. Get into the right attitude and then show up. I don't know what it means. I'm thinking that it's relative to depending on the person and where they are. But I also thought further on that, and I thought, well, based on whose standards am I being my best? Because in today's time, with so much in life and people going left and right, and then being in and out of relationships and not taking the time to do a self-examination. We just continue living life as it is. And do we really know who our best version is? And according to whose standards am I measuring up to or measuring to? Now, that in itself is a challenge, because no, we don't want to be judged or misjudged or misunderstood, because that's a whole other issue. that oftentimes we are misunderstood. I might show up with the best that I can be because I'm going through a process. And this is what I believe it really means, is that when we are in a process, there comes a time in that process where we need to be vulnerable. You've been through a challenging time. You are no longer who you were. And you know that by fact. You're not hiding and you're not pretending. And when you show up with the person of who you are. Now, do people see truly all of who we are? No, because I believe that there might be a way, not necessarily intentionally, but the way we are at home. In other words, we don't go to work in our pajamas. We don't go to work with our hair up and what have you. That may just be me at 6 o'clock in the evening when I get home from a busy day, or when I leave the office, when I'm done in my work day. I just want to put my hair up and get myself in something comfortable. That's me. That is the real me in that moment and in that atmosphere. But when I come across and before friends and relatives or people brand new, I'm going to bring a version of me that's going to not offend someone who is going to be present. Now, what I mean by that is I'm not going to show up with my pajamas, and there's going to be a little bit of extra care that I'm going to take. But that's the outward side of me. What about the inside? What about the person that nobody sees? The person that when you lay your head at night, you cry because you feel lonely. You feel broken. What about that person? So oftentimes we do show up with that because it's part of who we are. And if that part of us is not dealt with, not healed, not made whole, it's scarred, then what's going to happen is the atmosphere is going to be affected. So with our conversation, what I really want to, often when I come before you to share a thought that I pray will be helpful, or something that you can think a little further, I kind of want to bring and present at least 3 points that you could walk away with, and then a prayer. 3 points, because more than that, I think would be overwhelming. But the first thing that I want to share is, one, have you come to terms that there is a side of you that may not be as pleasant or as welcoming, that might be hurting, that might be offensive? Have you come to terms that there is a side of you that every time it shows up, every time you show up, or that side of you presents itself, there's a negative reaction that you get? I suggest to stop and take a look at that. Don't ignore it. Don't say, well, that's just how I am. And it's not to please anybody, but if there is something that can be fixed because of the environment that shifts when that part of you shows up, and you might hear snippets here or there, maybe from friends, you might notice that every time you do show up, there's things that happens, and it's easy to say it's this person and that person. But when someone is offended by something that we do, it's not, I've used it before in the past. If I get a negative reaction, I will take it to my place of privacy, and I'll ask myself, I'll ask God, why was that person so offended? Now, there are some people who have their own issues or what have you, but I'm speaking to my actions, my character, my behavior. So the first thing is, have you taken a look at that person that every time that you show up, on the outside, you're looking great. You're on point from head to toe. But maybe it's the attitude. Maybe it's the reactions to certain things. Maybe it's the quietness. There's just something that when that person shows up, it shifts the atmosphere and there's a negative reaction. The second thing I suggest is to take a look at the standards. Whose standards are you trying to meet, or by whose standards have you determined that where you are is the best you can be? Because so oftentimes we cut ourselves short, and we think that there's I've reached this point and there's nowhere else for me to go. There's no more of me that I can give. I've given my best and I've given my all. And that's true when we are operating in our own abilities. But when God says for us to lean on Him and to cast all our cares on Him, it is because He knows that He has placed so much more in us and there's so much more else to do. So when I show up in my job, when I show up on a date, when I show up in an event, it's a good idea to know on a day-to-day, what standards am I living by? What standards am I um, abiding by? What standards in my life might need a little bit of tweaking, or maybe it's time to get out of that mindset. It's time to get out of that place where it's so tiresome. One thing about our emotions is that our emotions do not lie. So when we begin to feel drained, if we begin to feel tired, every single time we respond a certain way and we think that we have reached and plateaued and there's nowhere else to go, and we begin to not treat people right because we treat people based not always on how they treat us, but sometimes it's just what's going on inside of us. So we are rejected. We face rejection over and over again, and it's over the same thing. I suggest to take a look at what standards have you set? Whose standards are you following that determine this is the best of who I am? There's no more of me to give. And I understand that there are times that enough is enough about certain things, and we have to get tired of barely making it, or barely getting there, or barely getting the job, barely getting the date, barely getting to the finish line, and never getting to the other side of the finish line, never crossing it. And sometimes it's our own attitude. Sometimes it's because we have standards in place that we've been following for years and we are not open to change. And the third thing is boundaries. There's boundaries and non-negotiables. Do you have some of those in place that will prepare you to boost you into the next place in the next dimension or higher? Do you have boundaries set that maybe you set them, you forgot them, and you've crossed them, or you've compromised and you've allowed those boundaries to be compromised, depending on maybe someone that you want to impress, someone that you are concerned needs to feel good, and you want to be the one who makes them feel good. I'm here to tell you, we cannot control other people's emotions. We can only control what we have. So we have to really get out of that place that I want them to feel good. I want them to feel X, Y, Z. That is not for us to decide. That is really the person, the other individual's choice to make. Now we can contribute. So when I show up with the best part of me, because I am in a process, I'm trying to detach myself from things that have followed me for years, and I no longer want that to be a negative towards the environments that I bring. I always want to bring the best part of me that's going to not bring negativity or not stir up any type of negativity or bring a negative reaction. And if it does, that it can just bounce off of me. That you can walk in a room and you're confident. I remember years ago, I used to be very conscientious about walking into a crowded room. And that was so hard for me to deal with. And it was hard for me to bring my best because I never do. Of course, back then you didn't hear that term. But if I didn't feel my very best, if I didn't feel my very best, if I didn't feel that what I was wearing, my hair was my very best, then I would not go into that room because I didn't feel my very best and I felt intimidated. And when I walked in, I just knew that everybody had to look at me. Well, that had to be broken when I would travel with my employer and we had these events that were national events and we had to be present. And I didn't always have someone to walk in with me. My coworkers, maybe they beat me there, especially a happy hour that I had to be there because it was part of the event. It was so hard for me, but I broke away from that because the more I did it and the more I broke away from the negative emotion that would rise up, and usually that was dealt with outside of trying to walk into this place. A lot of what we face in front of people is based off of what we have or have not dealt with in secret. And the same applies when, if you are single and you're wanting to date, you're wanting to make new friends. And also, what helped me in breaking that is that I've been single for most of my life, even though I've been married once. After that, I was divorced for a long time. So I've been divorced and by myself. After now my daughters are grown and all, been by myself for a long time. And also, I'll go to lunch and to brunch by myself if I don't have a friend to go with or what have you. I don't shy away from it. I will sometimes intentionally just set a time or date, just depending on what I want to do. And I'll go by myself. I'll go to the movies or what have you. So that's no longer an issue. Plus, not to mention, I'm older. So what happens when you get older is that you care less about what people say, but I still want to show up at that restaurant, at the movies, wherever I am by myself. I still want to show up with the best that I can be. So those negative attitudes or those emotions that will attract negativity, I deal with it at home. So most of the time, I'm pretty good. And if I don't feel like going out, I don't go out unless I absolutely have to. Nonetheless, if I'm invited to an event, if I don't want to be there, even if I get there and I'm just not feeling like I want to be there, I'm trying to break that, I much rather not go in, depending on what it is. It doesn't happen too often, but it is. So in order for me to bring my very best, one, I have to make sure that I know that there's a part of me that still needs to be dealt with, needs to be fixed. Because if I bring that on again on to an event where it's a date, it's meeting new friends, and that negativity. Now we can't pretend though, and that's one thing that we have to understand is you can't pretend. We can fix ourselves up from head to toe, but that emotion and that negativity, that part of us that is not our very best, and when it's not our very best, is that part of us that we've ignored. That's really what I feel that this means. I went into Chat GPT and I asked it what the meaning of it was. I said, okay, when people say this, what are they really saying? And I wonder if we really know what we're saying. So I didn't Google it, but I did go into Chat GPT and I asked it, and it made sense. It says, when you're working towards certain values and certain standards, you're in a process. And I think in life we're just always in a process. But and that's true. There's truth to that. But when we're in a process and we're realizing that this part of me is not my very best, so I need to work on that. For example, say I just have the issue of always being late to an event, to a party, and I'm known for that. Okay, what am I doing to fix that? Am I doing something that is noticeable, not just for anyone else, but is it noticeable? Because people will notice when they'll notice the negative, and they may not say anything, and or they might, and if they see it, they'll notice when there's change. So to show up with the best that I can be, show up with the best version of who you are, means that once you've identified that there's a part of you that is not your very best, once upon a time it was, but because of trauma, because of hurt, because of something that happened, that part of you has been suppressed. Then it's time to start working on that. Find a standard, preferably God's standard. That's really the best standard in the Bible, that you can look up a scripture. If it's insecurity, if it's fear, if it's anything that is hurtful, you're timid, there is a scripture for that. So in reading that particular scripture that applies to that part of you, that if you show up with that, and every time you show up feeling timid and feeling scared, there's a negative attraction that happens, and you really leave out of there not feeling your very best. If not, sometimes we feel worse. So I do agree that we need to show up and bring our very best. But when we know that there's a part of us that is not our best, don't just leave it at home. I would venture to say, don't just leave it at home, but deal with it at home. Work on it. Enter into that place of process. Because to those of you who are single and you desire to be married, whether you've been married before or you're in that dating scene and you're realizing that you're affecting again, you can't control what other people feel, but you can definitely take control of what you present and who you are. Your mindset having to change. So when we show up with our very best, even though there may not be an attraction, if it's a blind date, if it's a whatever, if you are single and you are wanting to one day meet the right one, or just add to your friendship list, or meet a new, it's a networking group, etc., and you want to increase your networking group, we've got to show up with the best that we can be. But we have to, like I mentioned at first, is find what is the not that part of you that is not its very best, and work on that, so that you will know that when you show up, that will not show up with you. You will have already dealt with it, or you're in the process of that. Set a standard, preferably a godly standard. Set boundaries, and set non-negotiables. Non-negotiables, which means you set the line, you live within those boundaries, you stay within those non-negotiables, and you don't compromise until you've reached a place of maturity. Then you take a look at your boundaries. Then you even take a look at your non-negotiables. There's certain things that are seasonal, depending on where you are, and there's others that are just a lifestyle, and they help build character. And you'll find that not only are these things just verses that are words of a verse that is just being said, but know exactly what it means. Show up and bring the best part of you. And that best part of you is that very one that is in the process of becoming better, in the process of healing, in the process of growing. So in other words, don't just shut the door to everybody. Don't just reject everyone, but deal with that one part of you that is affecting who you meet, is affecting your environment, is bringing negativity. Deal with that person so that every time you go to a networking event, a new place, every time you are present, that you can walk in with your head held high because you know that that person that used to be is no longer a part of who you are today, and that you still have a ways in your future that God holds in his hands, and you know that he is making you for so much better. And I guarantee you that your environment will change. Even who and how you date will change, how you raise your children, how you respond to others, how you respond to negativity, how you respond to rejection. It will change because you will have built and dealt with those things that at one point were so negative and brought negativity. So even when you showed up looking good from head to toe, there was still a part of you that was not right. And that's really what that means. I believe that's really what that means, is that when you show up and you show up being the best version of who you are, that means that you are under the process, you recognize it, and you're willing to take the challenge to change. And that is my prayer, that you will submit yourself into a place, into a place with God, and he will help you deal and find out what areas in your life, in your space, that need to be squashed, forgotten, changed, fixed, and healed, so that when you show up, you can show up with the confidence that God has given you. I pray that that has helped you. Enjoy your coffee if you didn't finish it. I'm going to finish mine later on as I wind down, and have a great evening.